Hi, everyone. We are so excited to have you here for our first town hall with all of the Chicago Youth Service Corps members. We're so glad you were able to make it, and we're really excited to have you hear from our great speaker today. My name is Sarah Salim. I am with the Department of Family and Support Services at the city, and I've been working to launch the Chicago Youth Service Corps. This is the first year of this program where all of you are participating. So I've been supporting to launch this program and make sure all of you have wonderful opportunities this summer. It is my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Lisa Morrison Butler, who runs the city's Department of Family and Support Services. She is an incredible advocate for youth voice and youth programming, and just making sure that all of you have access to opportunities. Chicago Youth Service Corps was a dream of hers, and this is something that she has been really excited to get started and get going here in Chicago. She ran a program called City Year, which was another service year program for 11 years in Chicago before transitioning to the city. This is something that she has been extremely passionate about. So I'm going to have Commissioner Butler just speak a little bit about the program and what you all have been working on.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. And let's start a little bit with context. So when COVID-19 hit Chicago in March, few of us could have imagined just how it would change our lives. And perhaps more than any group, young Chicagoans have truly had their lives changed by COVID-19. From being quarantined, having school canceled, seeing your parents and your grandparents and your neighbors and your friends struggle to try to figure out how to respond to the virus, having all of the regular events that you look forward to get canceled. No prom, no graduation, no hanging out at the beach, no sports. And even now, 4 months later, we aren't 100% sure what lies ahead. And so it would be easy in the face of that to feel anxious, to feel discouraged, to feel powerless. But there's one thing that we know, and that is that at every important moment in the history of the United States, whenever challenges have come our way, it has been our young people who have always stepped up to play a huge role. And we know that in Chicago, that time is now, and that this will be no different. Many of the leaders, for example, of the civil rights movement were just college students when they took a stand against racism. Just earlier this week, one of the most important leaders of that movement passed away. John Lewis was almost 80 when he died this week, but he was just in his early 20s when he first became a leader in the civil rights movement. And the actions that he took at that young age would go on to make the United States a better place for every single African American and for Americans in general. So when we saw that COVID-19 was going to force all of us to live our lives in a really different way, a way that we couldn't imagine back in January, we just knew that we had to create an opportunity for young people in Chicago. We knew that we had to create some sort of space for young people in Chicago to not only be the victims of COVID and to be affected by COVID, but we knew we had to create an opportunity for young people here to lead and to shape and to impact what happens in their families, on their blocks, in their neighborhoods, and in the city overall. So we launched the Chicago Youth Service Corps. We knew you guys were out there. We knew this city was full of amazing young leaders looking for a place where their voices, their contributions could be elevated and fine-tuned. And so we closed our eyes and said a prayer, and we jumped in the deep end. And in less than 90 days, this idea has grown from just an idea to an actual reality. So for 6 weeks this summer, each of you will have a place to showcase your skills and your passions and your greatness. You have a place to lead and to learn and to contribute. As a member of the first ever Chicago Youth Service Corps, you're not just a bystander waiting around while COVID ravages the city. You are in the mix. You're creating, you're helping, you're making a difference, and you're helping us build a program. The Chicago Youth Service Corps will be around for many years to come, and next year, and hopefully for many years afterward, other young people will walk in your footsteps and be inspired by your example. Every successful movement, every lasting change in the history of the United States has been shaped by and strengthened by our young people. So I thank you today for answering the call, for your passion, for your skill, for raising your hand to literally help us build this program. I thank you for your service. I am in awe of each and every one of you and more grateful to you than you will ever know. And it's my pleasure now to introduce one of your own, and this is Caleb Dawson. Caleb is a member this year of the Chicago Youth Service Corps, but Caleb has quite a track record of leadership on his own before he ever joined us. He is passionate about service. For example, he is a Brian Sleep Memorial Fellow, and in addition to his job with the Chicago Youth Service Corps, he has a second job this summer focusing on increasing voter turnout. It is a pleasure to welcome Caleb Dawson. Caleb?
Thank you for the warm introduction, Commissioner, and thank you for championing the Chicago Youth Service Corps program. My name is Caleb Dunson, and I am a One Summer Chicago and Chicago Youth Service Corps participant. I'm specifically working with the Economic Awareness Council Money Mentor Program, where we teach our peers about the importance of banking. I'm also 17, born and raised in Austin. I graduated from Whitney Young High School and am currently an incoming freshman at Yale University, double majoring in computer science and ethics, politics, and economics. I'm also and CEO of the Youth Entrepreneurship League, a nonprofit that assists young people looking to start and grow their businesses. It is my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. READI Bocanegra. READI Bocanegra joined the Heartland Alliance in June 2017 as Senior Director of READI Chicago. In this role, he oversees the management and implementation of the evidence-based, trauma-informed program, reduce gun violence, and promote safety and in the city. As a pioneer in the field, Mr. Bocanegra brings years of experience in community-based organizations and programs created to address trauma and build resiliency among those most impacted by violence. Most recently, he served as Executive Director for the YMCA of Chicago's Youth Violence Prevention Program, where he was responsible for programs that focused on trauma-informed approaches, such as Urban Warriors and Bridging the Divide. Mr. Bocanegra holds both a master's and bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Chicago and Northeastern Illinois University, respectively. Previously, he served on Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Commission for a Safer Chicago, and most recently, he co-chaired Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Public Safety and Accountability Commission for a Safer Chicago. Thank you for joining us, Bocanegra. We are excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Kelly. I really appreciate it. And congratulations too on Yale. It is amazing. I've been there on the campus a couple of times. It is a beautiful, beautiful place. And it's actually surrounded similar to neighborhoods like Austin too. So there's a huge need around the campus as well, which is ironic, right? We try to, I wouldn't say leave our communities, right, for better places, but we explore these other opportunities with the hope that we could maybe take a break from some of the chaos that we often find ourselves in and hope that we come back and be able to give. And so in your journey, I wish you the best of luck and to find ways to be involved there as well, right? There are many communities there that are gonna need your help and need your insight. So thank you for that. It's a pleasure and for being here today this morning or afternoon, I should say. I am a big fan of the commissioner and her team who have been doing some amazing work around young people, but also redefining in terms of what we consider safety. How do we define a safer community? And it's a question that I often have to wrestle with. I grew up in the west side of Chicago, or the southwest side of Chicago, as I like to say. For about 18 years of my life, my landscape was the Cook County Jail. So I would open the door floor window of my house, and what I would see was the Division I. And that was for 18 years of my life, and similar to my siblings, they would see the same thing. And sometimes for people who don't know where Little Village is at, I would always reference, you know where the Cook County Jail is at? It's like, yes, that's where I live at. I live right around the corner. And then the other half of my life, I've lived in various parts of our state, mostly in southern parts of our state, which I'll get to in just a minute. But I think for the sake of today's conversation, I really wish that there was more of these kind of programs that there was more young people of color, who are really helping to inspire a different city. Um, Unfortunately, I grew up in an era where, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we saw, spike in violence in Chicago, where we saw about 1,000 homicides a year for several years. And in 2016, we gradually were approaching those very similar numbers, unfortunately. And then today, you saw what happened in the South Side of Chicago just last night, or just yesterday at a funeral. You saw what happened over the 4th of July weekend. And before, we would have to assemble our teams and think about, hey, we got these Memorial Day weekends, we have 4th of July weekend, Labor Day weekend, and we would really saturate our communities with, police, but also the nonprofit sector to ensure that we keep young people safe. But now, in light of COVID, we're seeing that happen every single week now. We're seeing 50, 70, 90 shootings on a weekend. Communities like Austin, communities like in West Garfield and the Greater Inglewood and Little Village and Humboldt Park area. And it's really unfortunate because most of the time it's young people whose lives are being taken too soon. And so here's what I would say. I would say that I hope that I could share a few comments, a few thoughts, share my experience, my journey of growing up in the city and what I currently do now, but not necessarily to inspire anybody. If you want to hear inspiration, I think you talk to Mr. Dunson right now, who's going to Yale. Those are, to me, the stories of inspiration, right? And I think that what I hope to highlight today is more in the sense of, how do we get young people like yourselves involved in these issues? How do we create pipelines of opportunity? How do we give back to the community? Growing up as a kid, making it out the hood was, getting a job and just moving out the neighborhood, moving to suburban areas like Cicero and Berwyn, communities that also are grappling with their share of violence as well. And so what I've learned is sometimes things in our communities don't necessarily change. And sometimes we just move the problem in other places, not necessarily solving this issue around equity and opportunity and access. And I think that's what I'm hoping I could highlight a little bit today. So having said that, I'm going to ask our team if Sarah doesn't mind putting up the slide briefly, and I'm going to ask for you to bear with me too as I try to do my best to navigate this conversation. 1 second. There you go. So as I was pointing out, I currently manage and direct one of the largest anti-violence programs in our country, and it's called READI Chicago, which stands for Rapid Employment Developing Initiative. And we are currently working in various communities that I'm sure many of you come from, like Austin, West Garfield, Greater Inglewood, and North Lawndale. And my hope is that as we see this program working and being able to reduce violence with those who are just a little, perhaps maybe the same age as some of you, some maybe a little older, but typically focusing with those who are 18 years and older. And actually, my hope is that I never get to see you in my program, to be quite honest. But there might be some individuals that you already know in the community that could benefit from a program like READI. So having said that, in my professional experience, I've had the opportunity, both wanting to and sometimes not necessarily being, not necessarily really wanting, to be invited into the lives of so many people. So many people who have been in prison, visiting people who are in prison, getting to know their story, getting to know how they ended up in prison. And ultimately, one common theme that I always hear from a lot of the men that I visit in prison is, if there was a way for you to change things in your life, if you could go back and you were to change one moment in your life, what would that be? And often the number one response that I get is, I wish I could go back to that moment in which I pulled the trigger. Or I wish I could go back to that moment in which I stuck up the store or I robbed this person. And so I asked myself, like, what if people had more time to really think through that moment, right? That moment that they find themselves in and wanting to make, that having to be forced or feeling compelled to make a decision, that might lead them to prison. And the truth is that most people do regret, have created that crime. But in that context, I also get to know like what led to that. And it's something that I've learned from many people in prison that often look like myself, and often who come from similar communities that I did as well. So having said that, I wonder like, what if that was possible? What if it was possible to really disrupt that one moment, right? That moment that you're about to act out, that moment you're going to have road rage, that moment you're going to actually, punch somebody, or you're going to say something negative to somebody, or in this case, with the men that I work, that moment you're about to pull out a gun and pull the trigger. Imagine if that was possible. And the truth is that it actually is. And one of the ways that we get to do that is to kind of behavioral therapy. Kind of behavior therapy is an example, a tool, an exercise in which we try to get men in the community who fit the READI description, and we really try to disrupt the way they think or the way they respond to what most of the time might seem a reasonable response given the circumstances they find themselves in a very negative way that could lead them to prison. So imagine if we were just to disrupt that. So right now, I could tell you that is one of the things that we're doing through READI Chicago. And we're seeing how that practice is actually helping many of our men to walk away from situations that could potentially put them in harm's way or where they could harm someone else. Now, there's more that I want to say about that. But here's the thing, that we have limited resources, just like you being in this program. You were selected to this program, and I am sure the commissioner wished she could provide this level of service to so many other people, right, across our city. But we have to be intentional with our services, and we have to be intentional with the resources that we have. So having said that, I want to share a quick story about a young man that I came across and met a little bit over a year ago. His name was Devon. Devon, African-American young man, early 20s, about 6'1", 6'2", tall, lengthy. You would look at his rap sheet and you would think, man, this guy's pretty hardcore. But the minute that you met him, right, he has this huge smile that really would disarm anybody. And in fact, when he would come to the space where he would come and work in our program, many of the guys that are from rival, cliques and gangs, they just grew to like him. And a lot of it had to do with just him, with that smile and his energy and how he disarmed so many people. So Devon was in our program for about 10 months, 11 months or so, and similar to many of you and similar to many of the people that we work with, he had many struggles, had a lot of struggles with law enforcement. He was on probation. He had several gun cases, and I only say that not to define who he is, but to illustrate the barriers and what he had to kind of continuously grapple with, including the fact that he struggled with a parent who had a substance abuse issue. And so therefore, his aunt took him in for some time and while his mom tried to recover. And so Devon was actually engaged in our program, was regularly coming. And, one evening, we gave him the good news that the Chicago Bears, who happens to be one of our partners, said, hey, we want to bring a group of guys who are to our training camp and meet some of the players. So Devon, along a handful of other participants and staff, had a chance to go out there. And, just like any young person, he's excited, getting autographs, taking pictures. People are texting me the pictures, the staff's texting me pictures. And because I've met Devon in the past, I was really happy for him, really excited for him as well. And I thought he deserved every bit of that opportunity. And next day, he comes home. He shows up to work on time. He's bragging to his peers at the work site about what just happened to him yesterday, showing off the pictures, and he's having a good time. Well, 5 o'clock came. Staff and our participants were dismissed. Him and two other young men were walking in North Lawndale, walking back to their home. And these three individuals always stick together, and all three of them were doing very positive stuff. And for some reason or another that day they decided to take a shortcut. And the shortcut was simply a 1 city block difference. So instead of walking past this one block and then crossing the other block and heading home, they said, no, let's just take the shortcut. And the minute they actually bend the corner there, somebody, sounds like it was a young man, noticed them, ran down the stairs of a house, and immediately began firing. 3 young men ran. Devon fell, and unfortunately, this other young man shot him multiple times when he was on the ground. And that ended Devon's life at a very young age. The next few days, it was really hard for the staff because they've invested so much time and energy in this young man. And it was also very hard for those 2 other participants who were with him, and they were struggling. And I just happened to come across his journal in which one of his coaches and mentors was sharing with me, and I was reading it. And I read his early passages, and he talked about how much he hated his life and how much he hated his neighborhood, how much he hated the situation. And then I looked at the most recent journal entry, and he talked about how much he was looking forward to coming to work and how much he was looking forward to a different day and a new job that he was hoping to get after the program. And he talked about his sister, how he wanted to kind of help his sister out, help his aunt out, help his mom out. And of course, I listened to this, and I read this, and I'm just thinking to myself, what more could we have done? But here's the thing too. I asked myself, what if the young man who shot him, what if we would have had the opportunity to provide him the service of READI Chicago? And maybe we would have saved not only Devon's life, but we would have saved that young man's life, because now for the rest of his life, he's either got to watch over his back, he's got to not only from the people who might retaliate, but also from the police, and have to deal with that conscience. And if he gets caught, today and day, when you get 40 years, 60 years for murder, like that's exactly what you're going to do. There is no more this half-time or good behavior for violent cases. And I think sometimes young people often don't realize that 40 years is a long time. Your family will grow without you. And your siblings will have children, and as much as they love you, now they have another family they're responsible to. So I share that example with Devon because sometimes what I've learned through this work is that there's so many people in our communities that want change, and they're looking for the opportunities. And some people take advantage, such as you, and some people just, for a lot of different reasons, are not ready or don't feel that they could do it. And the other part around that's really disheartening is that, unfortunately, Devon was ready to change, but the environment that he was in was not. It was too slow to take in Devon's change. Next slide, please. When I talk about the criminal justice system and as it relates to this young man, if he was to get caught, and what he's up against, he's up against a system that is not going to show any leniency. A lot of it because of race. A lot of it has to do because of the crime he committed. And it's really unfortunate because I asked myself, why did this young man feel that he had to do this? And so then I reflect about my own life. I reflect about choices that I made in my own life. And the bottom line is this. I grew up in South Lawndale, struggled with a lot of domestic violence in my home. I never really wanted to be at home. I hated being at the house, witnessing my mother being beat up. And as a little kid, skinny, weighing probably less than 100 pounds at the age of 13, I didn't know how to help my mom or my siblings. And so I turned to the gangs. And from the ages of 14 to 18, I was in and out, police stations and detention centers. And eventually, by the time I was 18 years old, I was in front of a judge, and I was being charged for a first-degree gang-related murder, to which I ended up being sentenced to 29 years. And at that time back then, you would do half of your time. So I ended up doing 14 years and 3 months. They gave me 3 months of good behavior. That's 5,200 days in prison, in a room probably no bigger than your bathroom, having to share it with another person, and then spending almost 2 years in segregation in the hole. A lot of it had to do with organizing around education. And I think about what my family struggled around that time. I think about what the victim in my case, his family struggled. And nobody wins from all this. Nobody wins. And while I appreciate, and I don't think I would ever change the fact that I went to prison, I think it really informed the way that I look at my life and the way that I live my life and the work that I do. I just wish I would have gone to prison maybe for something else. I don't know. Maybe for wrongfully convicted crime or something. I don't know. I don't know if I would have come out the same way, but I just think that I don't want to take that experience and let it go to waste either. And this is why I try my best to apply what I've learned through this journey in my life, so that others don't make the same mistakes. But I think more importantly, to prevent others from being in that same space and from seeing other mothers having to bury their children as well. When I talked about the kind of behavior therapy, and I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the CBT in the context, just to give you some context and in terms of like why I think this is important. Unfortunately, Chicago is seeing so many shootings. And right now, today, we're seeing shootings increase also in LA. We're seeing them in New York. We're seeing them in Detroit. And it's actually happening in other places, more so than in the last several years. And it's really unfortunate because, you know, when you think about the people who are being killed in the areas and the communities, there are communities in urban cities where predominantly are Black and brown, where there's high increase of poverty and unemployment, and there's also lack of education or quality education. And I say those things to you because we're trying to change the system, and I would make the argument that it's not just about programs, but it's about changing everything else that's creating and perpetuating this level of violence. In Illinois, we have about almost 1,500 policies. We actually lead. I think we're number one, number two by now, with the most policies that create barriers for people who have backgrounds. And if you look at a community like North Lawndale, where the folks there between the ages of 18 and 36, 70% of them actually, according to a study from a few years ago, have a background. How do we expect people to move ahead? So I feel like we have a system, right, that we try to promote equity and we try to think about opportunity, but it's almost at the same time creating all these barriers for us to move forward. And I think that's one of the things that I want to make sure this group is able to acknowledge and think about too, because you're the people, this group of people are the folks who are going to help us make those changes in terms of what's needed. And I think about what's happening in our city right now with all the civic engagement and the protesting, with the Black Lives Matter movement. It is really important to get young voices and to mobilize young people, right, in these actions, because we need to we need to create changes in our communities. Next slide, please. So again, I'm looking at the slide. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but here's what I want to point out is that often we hear about young people being killed. And it is really unfortunate for all the obvious reasons. And I'm glad that we have programs like the ones that you're in right now and other youth programs that are being managed through the Department of Family and Social Services, because we need to get ahead. We need to think about prevention intervention work. And it's, at the same time, if we don't do that, then you see that number where it says 18 to 19 ages of shooting victims. What's going to end up happening is that if we don't get ahead of this, we're going to continue to see younger adults continue to be the highest concentration of victimization and perpetration. So we need to address the current issue that we're facing right now, and at the same time, think about viable pathways for young people, right? So they don't have the same outcomes that we're seeing today with many of the participants in READI Chicago. In fact, within a 5-week period, we have lost 5 men in our program already. Since COVID started, we have lost 8, 6 to shootings, 1 to an overdose, and 1 to a car accident. And so I'm tired of going to funerals. Next slide, please. These men that you see here, people would say, Eddie, they don't want to work. They don't care about themselves. They don't care about their community. I have data now to prove that otherwise. I have data to tell you that the men in our program really been seeking for opportunities to change. And they also want a safe community. These guys who are walking around with guns are like, Eddie, I don't want to walk around with a gun, but like, I also don't want to get caught without a gun. And it's the reality they live in. I live in the Grange Park. I don't have to worry about somebody doing a drive-by at my house or somebody knocking the door and trying to rob me. So, and yet, I don't feel that we have a lot of police on the Grange. So I would even make the argument that doesn't require, we don't need more police officers in our communities, right, to make our community much safer. What we need is thinking about what our residents, what do you, our young people, like how do you define safety? And what do you want in order to create a safer community? And what I've learned through our conversations, you know, with some of the reports that I've seen, is that you're looking for access, you're looking for opportunities for employment, you're looking for education opportunities, you're looking for more programs in the community. And why not? You deserve that. Next slide, please. One more slide. So at the end of the day, and I'm gonna end here and maybe tell one last story. At the end of the day, this is what I believe. I believe that there's a group of people out there that society has forgotten about. My success, I run a $18 million violence prevention program, one of the largest in our country. And what I'm really proud about is that not only are we saving lives, but I've been very intentional of hiring people that are just like me, meaning people who come from the hood, from similar communities, people who've been to prison, but these are also individuals that have got their bachelor's degree, have their master's degree. Some are getting their PhD right now. And I've been very intentional to create access and opportunity for them too, because they need, right? They need to move up. They need to be our future commissioner of our city. They need to be our next mayor, if at all possible. And why not? I never imagined in a million years that I was going to be doing this. Before I left prison, I had a business plan in which I wanted to sell hot dogs because I figured that nobody's going to give me a job because of my background. And I started as a volunteer while I was going to school. And from that volunteer opportunity led to one job and then led to another job. And every job that I've had, every job that I've actually have worked, I've never applied for. People recruited me for. And every job that I did apply for, I got denied because of my background. Go figure. So I think that there are many people in our communities like you who are talented, that are gifted, that have a lot to contribute to society and our community. The question is, like, are we tapping into that? The question is, are we creating opportunity and access? And I you know, as a person of faith, I've committed to God that with every opportunity he gives me, I'm going to multiply it. Everything that he gives me, I'm going to multiply it as best as I can. And that includes when I have opportunities to hire people. And I think there's something very beautiful when you hire individuals who come from the neighborhood, who've seen a lot, who struggled a lot, who've gone through the systems or been victims of violence, and that you're able to take that, and you're able to heal others along the way. I just think it's powerful. And the three men that you see right here with me are three amazing examples. These are individuals that have also been shot, individuals who've been through the system. These are individuals who in this picture were achieving one of the certification program for 10 weeks, and they were super proud of themselves. And I think that it's the small things that we have to pause, acknowledge, and we have to really lift up and praise, because there's a lot that comes along with that. And I'm really proud as you know, as you are sitting here and thinking about your future, or the fact that you're in this program and that you're actively involved in this conversation. Like, I'm looking at the number, 247 participants in this call. Thank you for that. I was just on a call the other day with Paul Ryan, who was the previous Speaker of the House for the Republicans, and he might have had about 40 people. I was like, damn. So you guys have definitely done a better job on that. So I wanna share a quick video, if we don't mind going to the video, and then I wanna share a quick story in just a minute after that, and then I'd love to just have some conversation if at all possible.
I just did 9 years straight in prison. I'm only 28.
I got shot like 9 times before READI. I've been in jail for gun cases and stuff like that. And when I put this program, I really didn't care about life.
When you are faced with the skepticism of people who say that it's too late to try to change young men who are above 18, we urge you to reject that claim, because READI Chicago is showing that men are ready for change.
I was just so scared at the time, but I knew it was time for a change, because I got 2 kids and I don't want my son to follow my same footprint.
But 8 hours after day, we got something to do that's positive. We clean up our community. I got my forklift license. I'm about to get my food handling certificate from READI. Like, this all through READI.
They treated me like a brother, like a family member. So when I found that that attention, I just stuck with it, and I did the whole 18 months without missing a day.
I hope that we learn from our mistakes and other people's mistakes, so we don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over. Change starts with us.
I just wish like more people just come and just see what we're doing in this program.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So I have 2 quick comments and a brief story, and then I really would love to have a conversation. You know, today, right, in our city, in our country, we're struggling with quite a bit. And this struggle, right, has been going on for many, many centuries. And there are some people in our country, in our own backyard, our own neighbor communities, who don't care about North Lawndale or Austin, who have found ways to separate these communities from their own community. And they don't care about, Black Lives Matter movements or any other movements that try to create change. Some are complacent and they're just like, hey, this doesn't impact me. Some don't see the point. Some feel that we live in a perfect country. Some make comments or or not as involved as maybe they should, because they feel that they don't fully understand what's going on. Some would say all lives matter. And then I asked the question, I think you missed the point. And there's a lot that I could say around that. But you should know this, that there is a population that don't really care much about us, who don't understand of what it's like to walk in your shoes, who have no idea, right? Like in my case, witnessing your mom being beat up all the time, or what it's like to see your cousin OD at a young age, but you've been shot at, but you inflict harm on someone else and have to deal with that. And part of my job is like, is it my job to educate them? And I struggle with that at times because they're adults. Yet at the same time, I have 6 little kids, and I want to make their community in this world a better place. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that comes out of this conversation is that we have 247 people on this call. Imagine if all of us expressed our voting power. That's a pretty big number. Imagine if all of us in this call will put our heads together and think about how can we change a community? And maybe it's one at a time. Like what would that look like? And I you know, I'm a very optimistic person and I'm a dreamer. And I think there's a lot that could be accomplished. Because it's not just you, right? It's like bringing in your family and your siblings and your parents and neighbors. Then we have an army. Then we have a movement. And right now there's a movement happening in our own backyard. The second thing that I want to point out to you too is this, is that, you know, life isn't fair, and we already started, you know, we started yards away from the starting line. And so we're already at disadvantage. And so the more that you could find opportunities to educate yourself, to go to school, for example, right? To take advantage of every opportunity and don't take them for granted. Like this program, don't take it for granted. Don't take it for granted, because these opportunities lead to other opportunities. And talk to your coaches, talk to your mentors, right? About how to create a pathway for those opportunities. And if they don't know, tell them to put you in contact with somebody who knows of how to get you to the place you want to get to. I had to learn it the hard way. And I still, right, even at my age right now, I'm wondering, like, what is possible? And I just, now I feel like the sky's the limit, despite of the fact that I've even myself have self-sabotaged my, you know, in many cases. So I want to leave you with 2 thoughts. And finally, here's a quick story. In 2004, my brother came to visit me in prison. I have 4 siblings. One of them, three of the 4 were in the military. And one of my siblings came to visit me, and it was Alex, my second youngest, who joined the Army because at 17, I wanted to join the Marines. And I wanted to join the Marines to get out of this mess that I was in. I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know, I was like just drowning and feeling like, how do I get out from this? So my brother joined the Army and kind of made my dream come true, right? According to him. And by this time, he was in the Army since 2000. And when the war in Iraq kicked off in 2003, he was one of the first units deployed there. He's what you call a reconnaissance, right? Infantry. And then a year later, he was recalled again. He was actually at the University of Houston when an MP showed up, military police officer showed up, and said, "We've been looking for you." And my brother, right, he knew they were looking for him. He didn't want to go back. He's like, "I'm in school. I did my 4 years already. Leave me alone." But he had to go back based on a contract. So he did a second tour. And there was a second tour in 04 that, or beginning of 05, that he was injured multiple times. And as a result of those injuries, he is now a full disabled veteran. Highly decorated, still struggles to this day, but has found ways to just be able to give back. And I share that story for 2 reasons. One is that my brother once told me, he said, "Man, Eddie, here I am fighting for democracy in another country, in another foreign country, when my own country, you know, people who have records can't vote." And I said to him, "Well, the good thing is in our state of Illinois, we could, but there's so many other states that you can't." So I felt like the irony behind that too. The second thing that he pointed out, which is perhaps even more important for me, is that by that time he was already diagnosed with PTSD. And he was pointing out all these symptoms. And then he told me, "Eddie, you got the same symptoms." And I said, "No, I don't." He's like, "Yes, you do." So he outlined them. You know, say you don't sleep well, you cold sweats, you have these nightmares, right? Anxiety, all these things. And I was like, yeah, but I'm in prison. And I've never been to war. And he says, Eddie, but I witnessed all these things happen to you. I witnessed police officers beat you up. I witnessed, you being run over. I witnessed, you coming from school with, bruises and black eyes, and all these different things. And I was like, yeah, but that's the streets. He's like, all of it produces trauma, Eddie. Long story short, as a result of that conversation, I started a program at the YMCA called Urban Warriors, where I paired up young people who were involved in the system, who were in gangs, who experienced a lot of trauma, and I connected them to U.S. combat veterans. And the purpose of that is that if society, if government or certain communities don't recognize the trauma that many of our young people experience, I felt that, well, let me find a creative way to be able to do that. And so I did it with veterans because, again, who's going to argue that veterans or some veterans don't have PTSD? And what we learned through our study is that our young people in our program with Urban Warriors have more symptoms of PTSD than our own returning veterans. That's a shame because we don't acknowledge those young people in their trauma. We don't diagnose them. We don't give them the proper treatment. And that stood with me. And it's that spirit that I bring into READI Chicago. Because of that program, twice I went to the White House, and I was very fortunate to be there through the previous administration. And as a result of that, I was continuing to just amplify the need, right, for young people as it relates to trauma and the need to support those kind of initiatives. So anyways, I really appreciate the time. I think I've spoken way too much that I intended to. As I mentioned, I'm not here to inspire anybody. My story is not necessarily unique. There's so many other people who have similar stories. But I think that the thing that I hope to leave with you is this idea that you have been entrusted a lot. You have this opportunity right now with this program. The question is like, how are you going to build on that? How are you going to return that investment back? So I'd love to just kind of have some dialogue, maybe some Q&A, some questions, and Mr. Dunson, maybe you might have the first question, and I'll just stop there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Mr. Bocanegra. I would actually disagree with you and say that your story is incredibly unique. It definitely resonated with me, and I hope it resonated with all of the other participants in this webinar. Before we get into the Q&A, and I have some questions that some of the young people sent in a couple of days ago, I'd just like to mention that there are also almost 50 people live streaming on YouTube. So we are at around 300 people listening in. And I think that's an incredible thing to just uplift and call out before we get into the Q&A. And so with that being said, I'd like to get into our first question, which comes from David J. of After School Matters. And they ask, how do you continue to learn and grow as a leader?
I think that the minute that you stop doing that, you're no longer a leader. I think it's really important for us to continue to evolve, right? And by leader, I want to be clear about something. Don't be fooled by titles. I don't care about titles. And they're important to some extent, right? Because it shows a level of accomplishment if you've earned it. And it shows a level of like, the assumption that the person has a level of expertise. I've learned through my journey that sometimes the titles, right, that people have don't necessarily reflect the intelligence of the individual. So I say that to you is that you, right, the folks in this call are leaders by every right. And don't let someone else define that. And I think in terms of like, for the sake of leadership, as you're asking a question, I think it's really important that we all have biases. These biases are informed by our experience, by what we read, what we see, what we experience in life. And it's really important that we challenge those biases. It's really important that that as a leader, you reflect to recognize that you do have biases. And that you might think you're an expert, but in all honesty, you really are not. You know, that there's so much information out there to learn that ideally if you are being given the title of a leader or whatever position you have, then it is your job to be as informed as possible, because people are listening to you. People are looking at you. People are seeking guidance. And when you don't have the answer, I think it's important to say, hey, I don't have the answer, but I'll get back to you. Or to be able to consult with people. And that's part of being in leadership, that you're constantly consulting with others who are smart, right? You know, who are smarter than you at times, because you want to get their perspective to help inform the way that you are kind of helping to piece things together. So I think it's really important to never stop learning, and to always continue a path of like of hunger as it relates to just wanting more information, but the right information. That's also very critical, right? So don't spend too much time on Facebook, right? Looking at videos and that kind of stuff. Like be informed, read, right? Have conversations with others as well. There's so many ways of us learning from one another.
Yeah, that's incredible advice. And so I have two kind of similar questions, both from Josh K and Montserrat O, who's with the Chicago Park District. And so I'm going to combine them because I think that they're both incredibly valuable. So Josh K asks, what's the best way to convince friends or family members to get out of gang involvement? And Montserrat O asks, what's your advice for those who have experienced violence and are scared to search for help to cope with their trauma?
So here's the first thing that I'll say. Like, people, generally speaking, are very complex. And typically people want like a straight answer, right? And I wish I could give you a straight answer that this is how you do it.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there's we're getting like a muffle on your sound. I don't know if that's your microphone. I'm sorry to interrupt.
All right. Let me see if I can just move this a little bit ahead. What about now? Does it sound a little better?
It still sounds the same. I'm not sure if that's your connection or if it's the microphone. It was fine just up until the Q&A. So.
Well, I'm not sure. I might have to move around. Can you hear me a little better now or not really?
No, that's okay. We can understand what you're saying. It just sounds muffled. So I think we'll manage through it.
Okay, how about this? Give me 1 minute. Let me run to another room where it's possibly quiet. And again, I got 6 kids, so I got to figure out what's a quiet room, and maybe I'll get a better reception there. So give me 1 second, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you. Sorry about this.
But in the meantime, Mr. Dunson, maybe as we're doing this, I can still hear you as I run upstairs. I would love to kind of get maybe a thought or two from you, a reaction from what you heard, so that everybody else could hear while we're in transition.
Yeah, sure. So like I said previously, I think Mr. Bocanegra's story is incredibly unique and incredibly powerful, especially for me being a young kid coming from Austin and traveling every day to Whitney Young and seeing kind of the difference in resources that people that live in my neighborhood have versus people in the West Loop. And so I think Mr. Bocanegra did an amazing job of just calling out some of the problems we face in Chicago, and the fact that like a lot of us young people don't necessarily have access to opportunities that we need to grow. But I just definitely like to uplift everybody on this call and say that like you guys are amazing, incredibly dope people for sitting on this call, for listening, for wanting to improve yourselves as leaders, for taking a job this summer. Like that is not anything to shy away from. That's not anything to downplay. You guys are all incredible for dedicating yourselves to doing something this summer, to being productive and improving yourselves. And so I would just say, as a personal piece of advice, like keep doing what you're doing. You guys are all amazing people.
Thank you for those notes. You can't see me, man, but I feel like I'm blushing right now. Again, I just appreciate the fact that you're making you're complimenting somebody. Sometimes it's hard to compliment folks, and I'm like, why? Why is it so hard? How does it sound? How does it sound right now? Still muffled?
Yeah, it's still a little muffled, but we can hear you just fine. So I think it's okay.
Okay. Well, I'll try to speak slowly and more, a little bit more clear. So my response to the 2 questions that were asked, and here's the first thing that I would say. If I was a young man who asked a question, I would ask, why does my friend feel compelled to join a gang? And try to understand like why, what's the real reasons for that? And when I shared about domestic violence in my house, it was really the reason why I didn't want to be at home. So if I'm at home and I'm in the streets, just as a human being, doesn't matter if you're a young person or an adult, like we, for the most part, want a sense of belonging. Like we want to be part of something else. And for me, it was about like, I don't want to be home. I don't want to be witnessing this crazy stuff. I don't want to see my dad drunk all the time. And I'm going to hang out with this other group of people that if eventually they're just like, well, you're going to be one of us. Now there's more to that story, but typically that's how it ended up. So all of us have, people who are in gangs, join these gangs for various reasons, but for the most part, it's because they want to belong or because of safety reasons. Like they don't want to be assaulted. They feel like if they don't join a gang, they're going to get picked on. And that's really important because nobody really wants to be a victim as well. And so I say that because if you're able to start there, then you're able to kind of trace the reasons why this person is involved, and maybe as a friend, you could think about how do you provide something that he's looking for, and hope to replace that. So that's just, we do it a lot of times with programs, for example. We do programs because we try to create space of belonging and safety, so that these young men and girls don't have to go out into the neighborhood and hang out with another group of guys, right? But they're in the space. So that's part of the reason why we create programs, to replicate often what's either not at home or to counteract what's happening in the streets as well. The second question, can you repeat the second question again?
Yeah, sure. So it's from Montserrat O from the Chicago Park District. And they ask, what's your advice to those who have experienced violence and are scared to search for help to cope with their trauma?
So one thing that I didn't mention about READI Chicago and why it's very unique. On average, our men in our program, which we have over 660 men, on average, they have 17 to 18 arrests. 60% of them have done prison time. And here's the one stat that just always just eats me. 80% of them have been victims of violence, either through stabbing, assault, or shooting, which means that 200 plus men in READI Chicago have been victims of gun violence, meaning they've been shot. So I got over 200 men that are survivors of gun violence. But you know what happens? Because they have a background, society and everything in between only look at the background. They only look at the mistakes they made. They don't look at the fact that they were victims or survivors of violence. And that's really unfortunate because until we start thinking or recognizing that they're also victims who are grappling with a lot, how in the world are we going to be able to create real healing around this? So to answer your question, I think it's really important that people who have been victims of violence, that we don't take for granted, that we don't think, oh man, but that's how it is in the hood. Because once we start thinking that it's okay, or we start validating it, or it's like it becomes a norm, or we become desensitized behind it, like there's less hope there for real recovery. And so the more that we acknowledge someone's suffering or what they've gone through and say, hey, you might not think it's a big deal, man, but it really is, like, let's think about ways that we can support you. Let's think about ways that we can support each other in this process. Because all the science in the world tells us now that if you have been a victim of violence, and especially if you go through it repeatedly, right, whether you're witnessing it or it's happened to you, it does something to your brain. Like it does something to your brain in the sense that it slows the way that your brain reacts to things. That's one way. Second thing that would typically happen, and if that happens, often you're diagnosed with ADD without recognizing the reason why you're not learning a lot from school right now is because how the trauma impacted your brain to begin with. And so it doesn't matter if you've been shot, it doesn't matter if you've been assaulted, you've been bullied, like all of that, right? Some would say, well, it gives you character, Eddie. No, it doesn't. Like what that does is if it goes untreated, it's going to have multiple ripple effects in the future. So I think that knowing when you are encountered with someone who's been a victim, right, of violence, it's really important that we think about it, like, how do I support this person, especially if they're younger.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was an incredible answer. I mean, hopefully it helped out a lot of people on this call. And so I just want to jump right into the next question, which is actually from me. And it's about just you having a lot of experience working with community-based organizations, leading community-based organizations. And so I just wanted to ask you, what were some of the most effective strategies that you've seen or used throughout your career in working with community-based organizations?
Ooh, that's a really good question, man. So I want to answer this question in two ways. So the first is that I am a person of integrity. Like, I believe that it's a quality. Even when I was in a gang, like, it was a quality that I've always gravitated to and that I tried to just like own it. So I refuse to work with agencies who I don't believe have integrity. And how I describe that integrity is based on the kind of quality of work they do, or how much they might, hit their chest and say, hey, we do this and do that. And then when you look carefully, you're like, I don't know about that. It's important because of this reason. If the clients, if the participants in their program were my kids, or if it was me 30 years ago, what would I want for them? And I would want the same for them, right? No more and no less that if I had, I don't know, let's say for the sake of argument, I had cancer. And it's the type of cancer that could be cured right now if I address it right now with the right treatment. The question for me is like, would I go to Loretta Hospital? No offense to them, but I just know too many people that died there. Or would I go to maybe Stroger Hospital? Or would I go to a UFC hospital? I illustrate as an example is that at Stroger Hospital and at UFC, they're two prominent hospitals. They have the best physicians. So I would want the best for myself and for my family. The same way that I would want the best for my participants or any resident that comes from these neighborhoods who is looking for help. They deserve the best. And if we're being funded by the city, by the state, or philanthropy, or somebody's entrusting us with managing money to provide a service, then we should be able to give them the damn best we can. So that's one thing. I think that the second thing that I'll mention is this, in terms of like what works, right? Well, I think being in partnership is really critical. Recognizing that you can't do everything by yourself is really important. So you have to identify the right partners that complement what you're doing as well. And these have to be partners that are open-minded. They have to be partners that are willing to kind of do things differently. And I'll give you an example of the way that I look at my work. So in violence prevention, we have funded street outreach. We have funded traditional kind of intervention programs for decades. And all of them, have, all of them should be a part of a larger strategy. And all of them provide some level of solutions. But they're not, individually, they're not all the solution, if that makes sense. So here I come, I assemble a team, and I have READI Chicago. And I said to myself, and by the way, I'm a Chicago Bulls fan, so no judgment, right, on this. But I said, I wanna look at Golden State, and I wanna take the same approach to the game of basketball, and I wanna apply that in violence prevention. So what does that mean? That means I had to recruit the right kind of talent. That means that I no longer was going to succeed to traditional intervention work. And I said, man, instead of me following people's lead, right, about these other intervention programs, which, by the way, again, I want to be clear, are needed. I wanted to do things slightly different based on my lived experience, based on the fact that I have a master's degree, based on all that. So what I did was, the CBT is one example. The jobs is another example. The relentless engagement, metrics to identify the highest risk of individuals, right? The housing, being able to provide some housing for individuals. All the things, right, that I felt have been unaddressed at a high level. Thinking about how do we use that, because it's no different how Golden State started playing the outside game, right? 3 points, 3 points, 3 points. That forced all the other NBA teams to change their strategy around defense. That is exactly the same thing that I've done with READI Chicago. And so that's been working for me. And I've been through that journey, I've been able to identify good partners that are also creative thinkers, that are more about how do we think big? How do we think about holistically about these issues? And how do we really think about putting some skin in the game, right? And that to me is what's been working for me so far.
Yeah, that is an incredible way to think. And I just want to say before moving on to everybody on the call, if you're thinking about making an impact in your community, and I know you definitely are because you're here today, think like Mr. Bocanegra, think outside the box, you know, try and think of ways that you're seeing other people do some creative stuff in their communities, and try and think of ways that you can do creative stuff in your community. That's probably the best way to have an amazing impact. And so this leads right into our next question, which is from Treasure G. And they ask, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you had to accomplish to get where you are today?
Oh, man. That's a great question. That's a really good question. Listen, I live in a nice place. I earn good money. I have a beautiful family. All the material stuff that I've ever wanted as a kid, I have. You know, I have an AC in my house. Yes, an AC, you heard me correctly. Growing up as a kid, we didn't have that. The biggest obstacle has been me. I have been my biggest obstacle. And here's what I mean by that. When I spent all this time in prison and being told by my dad that I wasn't going to be shit, right, as a kid, like that stays with you, man. And I always try to like prove them wrong, right? And there was other people who might have felt the same way, and there was other people that were actually totally different. They were like, "Hey, we see so much potential in you. Like, we want to help you. Like you need to like do things right." And when you think about the years in prison and what I had to go through there, right? You start wondering, man, all these people come back in and out of prison, in and out of prison. Their plans didn't work. Like, how am I going to succeed? When my family moved to Texas, and I have a cousin who I'm going to parole to, but I can't stay there too long. You know, you start wondering, like, you're going to fail. Am I going to have to resort to like selling drugs or doing something else, right? You start having all these doubts about yourself. No matter the fact that I got 2 associate degrees while I was in prison, and I had a business plan about selling hot dogs, like all of that was still very questionable. And I would say that just about every job that I've had, I've always doubted myself. I've never been public about that. People would say, well, I don't see that, Eddie. It is true, man. It's really true. Part of it because like I talk different, right? Like even though I went to a top university, same university that Angela went to, right? And I'm proud of that school. I'm proud of how they trained me. I also just never pictured I was going to be at that school, like a top university. And I got accepted. And then I had to work really hard to prove that I could write. And that even though I spoke differently, right? Like I'm Mexican, I have an accent. And at the same time, I still got the hood in me, like the hood, right? Kind of, you know, comes out sometimes. And I was like, people are going to judge me. People are going to think like, oh, this guy's not smart. And you know, I had to like own the fact that I started so many programs with no money, and I've been able to bring them into $1 million, $2 million, right? sustainable programs. I'm like, well, maybe I should think about that for a minute. Like I was able to do that, and I don't see everybody doing that. So it took some time for me to build my own self-esteem, my own confidence in that. And there are times, right, publicly, people think that I'm pretty cocky. And I feel sometimes in my line of work, I have to be that way because I'm advocating for the folks who are in this call, for your older brothers and sisters, right? Like I feel that's my job. And I have to be a champion around that. But the obstacles has always been with me. And then the other obstacles have been about policies. And what I mean by that, I volunteered at UIC at the Department of Psychology after I worked at UIC for 3.5 years. And I was doing some work there and they were gonna hire me. And I was working for 3.5 weeks. I pretty much was working for free. But they're like, we're gonna give you this job. And finally HR came through and they denied my application after being there 3.5 weeks. And I remember when I got the news, I was in the parking lot in my car and I cried. I cried, man. I cried because again, I was denied something that I felt like in this group, I was the only person with lived experience, like that came from the hood, right? That came from Chicago, from these neighborhoods. That was a person of color. And because of my background, I was dismissed. So how in the world are we going to make progress in the space of violence prevention and criminal justice if you're not letting people like me in? So I cried because I was frustrated. I cried because I was like, you know, how am I going to fight this huge problem, man, when I feel like I don't have a win? And, you know, and I just like, I didn't quit. I didn't give up. Like I said, every job that I've had, like literally that I've had, I've never applied for. And every job that I wanted, I got denied. I got denied working at Walgreens. They didn't hire me. And now I know like some of their board members, right? So it's just it's funny, but I think the biggest obstacle for me was me. And so I say that to the people in this call and to you because there are going to be some times that you're going to feel that you don't have the competencies, right? That you feel like, man, you didn't go to the best school, or you're going to feel like because of the way you look, the way you talk, right? The way your hair is, you know, all of that. You're going to question, you're going to doubt yourself that you're for that position. And I'm going to tell you, screw that, man. You are. You're better than them because they can't speak to where you come from. People who don't come from where we come from can't speak about resiliency and tenacity. They can't speak to that. People who grew up in suburban areas, no offense to them, right? They're good, they're great, good for them. God had a different plan for them, good. But for the folks in this call, we don't come from there. And so we have to sometimes, continue this path of learning, educating ourselves, right? Be smart, be calculated, but don't doubt in yourself. Don't doubt in yourself, man. And think about what is it gonna like. Think about what do you feel you have to do to get what you want. And I think that's how you build also your confidence too. So anyways, it's a long-winded answer.
No, that was amazing. You dropped a lot of knowledge. And so we probably only have time for maybe 2 more questions. I know there are so many amazing questions, and we would want to keep you on here all day if we could, but we know people have things to get to. So I'll just jump right into the first of the last 2 questions. And this just came in through the chat from Shannon G. They say a lot of kids of color are taught to leave their communities in order to make it, or when they make it, they've actually left their communities. Should we break that narrative in order to place talent back into our communities, or is that selfish? And should people not have to shoulder that responsibility and go on and do their own things and be successful?
I think that's a great question. I think that's a question that individuals have to ask themselves. I chose not to live in the hood anymore. Part of it is because as a kid, right, making out the hood was to get out the hood. And that's always stood with me. So now my accomplishment, when I moved to Berwyn the first time, I was like, man, I made out the hood, right? And that was myself, right? That was like me saying like, I made it. There are people just like me who still live in the neighborhood and I commend them. But here's the thing. I have 6 kids now. And until, Chicago public schools improve their schools, right? Like, I'm in a position to provide something different to my kids that my parents couldn't do for me. And having said that, I take my kids into the neighborhood and I continue to invest in the neighborhood financially. I put my money where my mouth is. I shop in the neighborhood. I invest in property in the neighborhood, like all those things. My aunts and uncles still have property there, and so I still find ways to ensure, right, that I'm connected. Um, I still run support groups for parents who lost their kids to violence in the neighborhood. Those are my ways of still giving back. Um, at the end of the day, maybe as I get older, my kids leave. I want to go back to where I grew up at. And by that time, like my responsibilities as a father, right, would change by that time. So that's my quick answer to that. But I think you need both in many ways, because if you also don't leave, then how do you inform and educate others who don't have that experience, right? And how do you draw them closer, what's his name from Just Mercy, who wrote a book, Just Mercy, which, by the way, I recommend you to read that book or see the movie. Brian Stevenson, he talks a lot about proximity. And I think there's many ways that we could build proximity. Like, you going to Yale, it's going to help build proximity too. My question is, like, don't forget where you come from, right? When you're there, and draw those connections. Draw the connections to bring those resources back into the community. So yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an incredible answer. And I know it's a really tricky question that all of us are probably thinking about on this call. So thank you for providing a little bit of guidance. And so I'd like to leave off on a positive note with our very last question. And this question comes from Shania J. from the Chicago Public Libraries. She says, what are some positive words you can give to kids when they're looking to become leaders?
Wait, say the question one more time. I want to make sure I really own it.
Yeah, sure. So Shania asks, what are some positive words you can give to kids looking to become leaders?
It's like I said earlier, right? I think the fact that you're in this call, the fact that you're working, you're in this program, right? You're already a leader without you even probably acknowledging that. My suggestion to add to that, right? My 2 cents behind it would be this: is that it's imperative, right, that we continue to learn from each other, and that with every gift that you've been given, with every opportunity you've been given, that you find ways to multiply that, because that's how we'll make change too, and we create pathways for others that are coming behind us. So that's one thing that I'll point out. I think the other part is, like, leadership is not the kind of stuff you're gonna just read in books and just be like, I'm a leader now, right? Reading books on leadership development is really critical. It's important because you're learning from others who were in those spaces, right? But those individuals might not be in the same place that you've been, or might not have had the same opportunities or less opportunities that you've been given. So it's important to learn from others, but it's also important for you to, like, assess your situation and think about, how do you want to lead specific issues or your own life in this space? How do you want to navigate through that to create the kind of world that you want to create? And I would say, like, in my work, I am in the field of violence prevention. I take my work very serious. And so therefore, I look at my work as if I'm running an $18 million business. That's what I do. And I'm in the business of saving lives. That is my business. And so I think that for everything that you do, if you're working in a library, if you're working at the Park District, if you're working at Chicago Animal Care, if you're working and just cleaning out city lots or doing some graffiti or murals, right? Like, here's the really, honestly, God, the best advice that I can give you. Please don't take that for granted. If you're doing murals, if you're cleaning the park, if you're cleaning, the poop out of cages, right, from animals, like, take pride in that, man. Take pride in that, because people are seeing you. You are developing, right, these internal systems within you, right, that are going to create better outcomes for you in the next job, in the next job, in the next job. Communicate effectively. You know, when you mess up, own it. Own the mistake and then learn from that mistake. Be kind. Be patient with others. Recognize that some people are going to run their mouth on you. Recognize that sometimes you might be assigned to a group and you might be the only person who's really pushing that broom while everybody else is on their phone. Like, let them do what they're going to do. Focus on you. Focus on your discipline. And your work will speak for itself. Think of it as an exercise. Think of it as like you're in the gym, you're working out. The more that you could build consistency with yourself, the more that you could take responsibility, the more that will be given to you, the more that you will be entrusted with. And so I say that to you again to highlight what I pointed out. With every job that I've had, I've never applied. I've been recruited. And I started off as a volunteer. I was not getting paid. I started working at Ceasefire. Then I went to work at Community Renewal Society. While working there, I got a part-time job as a research assistant at University of Michigan. Then I got recruited to run as the executive director for the YMCA of Chicago. Then I got recruited in the same time for another part-time job for University of Columbia, New York, to do another research project. And then I got recruited to come here to Heartland Alliance. And through that journey, I've been recruited for committees, transition teams, boards, all of that. And every single one of those opportunities, every single one of them, including this one right now that we're in, I am learning. And I want to make the best of it. You know, this is why we had a presentation, right? I questioned myself if that presentation was the best thing, to be quite honest. I'm now openly reflecting with you. I'm like, was this the best presentation that I could have delivered? Maybe it could have been something different. But regardless, right, it's like I delivered and I prepared for that. Now I'm going to sit back after this call and say, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? So the next time that Angela gives me a call, right, that I feel like I could do better, you know? So, and the same thing goes for the commissioner. And the same thing goes for all those who are in this call right now, for Sarah and others. Like, we got to do our best for everything that we get an opportunity for. That's the best way that I could answer that question.
Yeah, well, that was amazing. And thank you so much for your time and your amazing insights. I'm looking at the chat right now, and I think all of the people on the call agree with me that this was an incredibly moving panel. Literally, the kids are in the chat absolutely praising you. I think we all gained a lot from this. And so without further ado, I'm going to kick it back over to Suresh. Thank you so much again, Mr. Bocanegra, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again. Have a good one.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Bocanegra, for your inspiring words. Also looking at the chat, and I know you said you're not here to inspire anybody, but you definitely did touch a lot of these young people on this call. And Caleb, thank you so much as well for introducing and moderating the Q&A. We're really glad to have you on this call. Just want to close out by thanking everyone for attending. And we were getting some questions in the chat about opportunities at either READI Chicago or some of the other programs you work at. So Mr. Bocanegra, if there's any opportunities that we can pass along to the young people on this call and in our program, please let us know. And I know a lot of these folks would be just so incredibly happy to support your work. Commissioner, is there anything you wanted to say to close out?
I want to thank all of the young people for once again raising their hand and helping us launch the first ever Chicago Youth Service Corps. Also want to thank Caleb Dunson for his amazing facilitation, as well as the fact that he was able to wing it while Eddie ran upstairs to move to another room. And just want to, for a moment, let's just celebrate Caleb. He is a shining example. I know there are many other Calebs out there, and we look forward to learning more about all of you and your plans. I know we'll be hearing more about Caleb as he moves into his amazing future. You guys are incredible leaders already. We know that we're not going to make you leaders. What we hope that the Chicago Youth Service Corps does is provide you with a platform where your leadership can shine. And so just thank you so very much for everything you're going to do over the rest of the summer. Thank you for joining, and thank you for being here today for this town hall meeting.
Thanks all and have a great day.